Okay, can you hear me? Okay, great, because I've heard enough loudspeaker now, so I prefer to just talk with my own voice. As you can see, I go without mic. Yeah, we made an effort, even though the first presenter isn't here, to have the same design of the slides here. The presentation is entitled "Can Employment Guarantee Alleviate Poverty?" Evidence from the NREGA. I'm not going to talk too much about the background because most of you in the room know more about this program than I do. But as a motivation, so if one looks into the preamble of this law, it says, ensuring social protection for the most vulnerable people living in rural India and ensuring livelihood security for the poor. However, most of the studies that are around, with the exception of the one that we just saw, address labor market and other effects of the NREGA, but not immediately those welfare effects, we think. And here we see the research gap. So the objective of this paper is to estimate welfare effects of the NREGA on rural households at an all India level. And in a nutshell, up front, the methodology, empirical methodology, it's a purely empirical paper, is we use data from the National Sample Survey on consumption, arranged by district. As others, we employ the phase-wise rollout of the program. We use a regression discontinuity analysis to address selection problems that were already mentioned in the last presentation. And we think the most interesting feature of our empirical analysis is that we do a thorough disaggregation both by subgroups of the rural population and by agricultural seasons. This is work with Christian Aldiges, who is here. Sorry, I didn't front of each slide. Christian. Good. So the findings are there is no measurable effect on consumption and poverty for the sample of all rural households that we consider. And we find large but somewhat imprecisely estimated effects for the sample of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes during the agricultural lean season in spring. So at the end of the talk, I will try to show you the broader picture, and we conclude that the Act appears to help the SC/ST households to improve consumption smoothing across agricultural seasons. That's, I guess, our main finding. Okay, what's our research contribution? So sort of more broadly, we contribute to a literature on the estimation of welfare effects of big national scale welfare programs in low and middle income countries. So here are some examples. There's not so much on employment programs, just Data and Rebellion in the Economic Journal in 1994. And more specifically, and sort of within the context of this conference, there is a bunch of work on labor market effects that we'll see in another session, and many of these people are here, I'm aware. And of course there are other issues which will be covered in other sessions. But so more closely on welfare and consumption, we are aware of 3 papers that are around. One we've just seen, which is Deininger and Liu, and I made an effort to summarize who's doing what, so that you can see or get a feel perhaps what our contribution is. So there's a paper by both which uses the same data as we do from the National Sample Survey. KO is Klonner and Aldiges in the last line here of this table. And so Deininger and Liu and Ravi and Engler, they use self-collected data both from AP, from Andhra Pradesh, both, and Klonner and Aldiges use data from all India. And you can see with respect to the methodology, we are the ones who try a regression discontinuity approach here. The other ones use diff and diff, and Deininger and Liu also propensity score matching. Good, so the outline is going to talk briefly about the data, empirical strategy, the results, a cost-benefit analysis, and a final discussion. Okay, so this is the NREGA phase-wise rollout that has already been mentioned. Okay, so we are using for this regression discontinuity a backwardness score by the National Planning Commission, which has been published in 2003. So I just tried to get you a feel what we're doing here. So here's an example of Madhya Pradesh, just the districts alphabetically and the backwardness index. So we are not going to use NREGA phase 1 districts because those were sort of selected already for the previous National Food for Work program. So we focus on phase 2 and 3. And so what we do is we sort of throw out all phase 1 districts, here example Madhya Pradesh again, and then sort the districts within each state by the backwardness index by the National Planning Commission. So here you can see we've just sorted them, and what you may also notice here is that it should be sort of the most backward districts are way more likely to be in phase 2, and the less backward ones are way more likely to be in phase 3 here. Okay, so we use 255 districts out of 330 in these two phases for which the score is available. These are mostly districts in the 17 major states of India, so not in states like Mizoram that we've seen in the first session. And the basic idea is that we view the 92 phase 2 districts that we have as a treatment group and the 163 phase 3 districts as a control group. We use the fiscal year 2006-07 before phase 2 became active as the baseline and 2007-08 as the end line. Here just some information on program expenditures. So if you look, for example, at SC/ST, percent of rural SC/ST households employed under the NREGA, you can see this 60%, so this is quite sizable in our district. So this is just for our phase 2 districts in 2007-2008. Okay, so this is the National Sample Survey data that we use, these two so-called thin rounds of data. And some summary statistics to give you a feel of what's going on here. In the upper panel you can see all rural households. In the lower panel you can see SC/ST households. What is immediately clear is that consumption is much lower and poverty much higher for SC/ST households in both years. And what I also want to draw your attention to is that the seasonal pattern of consumption is way less smooth for SC/ST households than for all rural households. So if you look at the headcount ratio, for example, in 2006 and 2007, it's around 35 for all rural households in both seasons, in fall and spring, and it jumps up from 49 to around 56 for SC/ST households in the lower panel. So these are sort of the two stylized facts up front that we observe about consumption. Good, so the empirical question here is, did consumption between our baseline and end line grow faster with the availability of NREGA sites than it would have without? A naive method would be to just compare the consumption trends across the 2 years and employ a parallel time trend assumption. This would amount to a differences in differences estimation. But so we think, and we have evidence for this, that this is not a sound approach because, as you've seen, well, not in the previous table, but the levels of consumption in phase 2 and 3 districts are so different that it's quite unlikely that they should exhibit the same time trends. Okay, so we use a method suggested by Laura Zimmermann, who's also here. We will predict NREGA phase 2 status of a district by this backwardness index of the Planning Commission that I've showed you. And we will compare, in a way, the most forward district that is predicted to just obtain phase 2 status with the most backward district that is predicted to be notified under phase 3, so not to obtain phase 2 status. And this gives a so-called local average treatment effect. So the thing is here, there's not an average treatment effect, there's no differences in differences, but it strictly applies only to a district that is at the cutoff of just receiving phase 2 status or phase 3 status. Here's again an example from Madhya Pradesh. The state has 42 districts, 18 in phase 1, we discard them, then 10 in phase 2 and 14 in phase 3. So here they are listed again. You've seen this before. Okay, and so the green ones are now those ones that, if we just follow the Planning Commission backwardness index, should have been in phase 2. Those are the 10 poorest. What do you see? Well, there are 2 that are not in phase 2, and there is 1, and actually 1 further down, which are in phase 2. So there are slight deviations from this rule to follow the Planning Commission. What we do now is that we center the rank around this cutoff of the green box. So we have now a variable called centered rank, which goes from here -9 to 0 and then up to greater values. And we sort of now assemble all states, the districts in all states around this cutoff. So here I've added Odisha and Rajasthan. And you can see, for example, for Odisha, it has 4 districts in phase 2 that their compliance was strictly according to the Planning Commission. And for Rajasthan, it was less so. And the idea is now, if the assumption holds that conditional on this, what we call centered rank, the probability of being in phase 2 has a downward drop at this cutoff, then one can employ this so-called fuzzy regression discontinuity design. And this picture shows that this is in fact the case. So the probability of being in phase 2 drops at this cutoff by about 70%. Okay, so this is the first step of the analysis. And the second step is then to look at actual outcomes, so consumption growth across districts, and look whether this consumption growth also has a jump at this cutoff. And here is one picture of the many analyses we conduct where this is in fact the case. So each bubble that you see is the average across 17 states of the districts with the same centered rank relative to this cutoff. And I'm not going to show you econometric formulas now. Essentially what we do is we do this graphical analysis in the regressions, and I'm just going to show you results then. So the estimated local program local average program effect is this estimated jump in the outcome, this one, divided by the jump in the assignment probability. And this is what you now see in these tables. So these are our results. Each of these little panels is one regression. So there is a total of 18 regression outputs that is assembled here. And the upper panel is for the sample of all rural households. The lower panel is for the sample of just rural SC/ST households. What you can see, we find no significant effects except for the spring season or among SC/ST households. And this effect is so big that it actually carries over to the all-year effect for SC/ST households, so when we pool fall and spring. These effects are imprecisely estimated, so you can see the standard error for consumption is 10. The point estimates are huge. This is huge. So this would mean 36%, for example. The 37.5 means 37% increase in spring consumption. And the headcount ratio, the base value was at around 60%, so the minus 45 would actually amount to more than a halving of poverty. However, we think it's more the pattern than the magnitude of the point estimates because they are noisy. Differences in differences, just as a reference, gives you a different answer. So there also we have effects for SC/ST households, but they would be driven rather by the fall, where you see that the poverty gap ratio, for example, decreases according to these estimates. Okay, we also do this falsification test where we find comfortingly no significant effects for the regression discontinuity approach, but we find effects for the differences in differences approach, which we take as evidence that it's not a sound approach. So you can see that actually between the years 05, 06 and 06, 07, we see increases without the NREGA among the SC/ST households. Okay, we do a bunch of robustness checks, which I don't have the time to present here. So we look at the end-line data only. We change the trimming, the fixed effects, functional forms. We conduct local polynomial regression. We use alternative sampling weights. We use an alternative baseline year. We also omit April to June because unlike what Maximo has said, our notion is that the phase 2 became active in May 2007 and not only in September, but even if we discard the observations from April to June, we still get the same pattern of effects for SC/STs. So this effect always persists. Okay, just a brief cost-benefit analysis. From the NREGA website, we got those data on the expenditures. The interesting bubbles here are the red ones, which tell the wage expenditures in phase 2 districts in our sample paid to SC/ST households divided by the SC/ST population in those districts. So it really corresponds to the consumption expenditure per month of an SC/ST individual in these districts. And you see in the spring season of 2008, this is around 60 rupees. And this matches closely our estimated consumption increase with the most conservative estimate we have. This is also just 60 rupees. With a more with other estimates we have, this could be as much as 140 rupees. So the order of magnitude seems to be similar. Now, the seasonality of the program effect, is it a blessing or a flaw? You know, you could think, is it bad that it only kicks in the spring season or not? We put together more data from various NSS rounds. This is all for scheduled casts and scheduled tries. And what you see, if you compare the phase 2 and the phase 3 districts, the left and right panel, is that consumption in phase 2 districts before the program, so in the 62nd and 63rd round, is way more bumpy in phase 2 districts than in phase 3 districts. So phase 3 districts, which are less backward, seem to have much better consumption smoothing opportunities for the poor households. And so here is a stylized depiction of the effect that we estimate if you arrange districts by this normalized score. Then the blue line is the fall consumption, and the red line is the spring consumption. What you can see to the right, so for less backward districts, fall and spring consumption are very similar, and before the NREGA, the spring consumption seemed to fall systematically short for the more backward districts, and now the NREGA seems to bring up the spring consumption to make consumption between fall and spring more smooth. Okay, and here is the final chart to give you the broad picture. So talking about consumption smoothing, we have 3 time series here. The blue one is agricultural output in fall and spring seasons from the Department of Agriculture. Usually the kharif, the fall harvest, is always greater than the spring harvest. So you can see these sort of seasonal structure. And now the green line is mean consumption according to various NSS rounds in phase 3 districts in our sample. You can see it's pretty smooth. Look at the phase 2 districts in our sample, which is the red line. It's way less smooth prior to 2007-8. And starting from the spring of 2008, the red line moves much more in parallel with the phase 3 districts than previously. So this is suggestive evidence. This is not rigorous evidence, but it's in accordance with the short-term 1-year effect that we estimate. On the other hand, we see that the SEST consumption levels between phase 2 and phase 3 don't converge. So there remains a gap. So it's more about, we think, consumption smoothing than bringing the levels of consumption up in a sustained fashion. Okay, so I come to the summary here. According to what we find, we think that these two goals specified by the Act, in fact, have been met. So it's the SEST households where we see the effects, and they are protected against seasonal consumption shocks in the first place. Seems to be reasonably cost-effective, even if our point estimates are overstated. Limitations and shortcomings of our analysis. First, again, we think the pattern is more important than the size of the effects we see. We cannot identify the sources of welfare gain, so 10 have been mentioned by Mahendra Dev. This remains in a black box here. We don't have average treatment effects, only local average treatment effects. The scope of our analysis is also severely limited. The phase 2 districts we have in our sample cover only 1/5 of the Indian rural population, but just because of we were keen on identifying causal program effects, we couldn't look at more of them. Also, what we can't elicit here, of course, is what happens to intra-household allocations. We only have household level data. It turns out that the sample is too small to get sharp results for consumption baskets. And finally, also regarding the scope, we only have the 17 major states, and we've seen in the previous presentation that actually the small states may have benefited even way more than the major states. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to your comments.
Thank you very much, Stefan. So now we open to questions. We have 10 minutes for questions for Stefan. So please, if you have a question, can you raise your hand and say from where you come and make the question? No questions? Yes. Here.
Subramaniam from the Ministry of Rural Development. Just wanted to know, have you studied the participation? Are there any SEST households which participated earlier but did not participate in the program? Did you look at participation also when you're studying the SEST households? Because there is some concern on that count. So I just wanted to know whether you had.
So one limitation which we definitely face is that we cannot match participation with the NSS consumption data. So we only rely on aggregates from 2 different sources. That's also why we can't really identify the channels, direct, indirect general equilibrium effects that drive these consumption increases. So the answer is no. So we only have the administrative information from the program website on participation, which is around 40% for SESTs in this year.
Just also wanted to know the April, June, that is one of the prime working seasons. So is there any particular reason why you have not taken that into account? And also the phase 1, I mean, what is the logic in eliminating the phase 1 districts?
We do take into account explicitly the working months that you're referring to, here. We're looking at seasonal results, so it's clear that these are the months where the action happens, so this is what we try to do. Phase 1 we just don't consider because we don't have a sound econometric identification approach that would give us a credible causal program effect. So it's really due to methodological reasons, even though it would be more interesting because phase 1 is a bigger phase than phase 2. Phase 2 is the smallest phase with just 130 districts.